Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into the delicate question of how even the smallest shift in time could ripple outward and reshape everything we know. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan or a soft background hum, and allow your body to rest a little deeper into where you are. Let this be a quiet space where your thoughts can wander without pressure. And if your mind begins to drift at any point, that's perfectly fine. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. Tonight we begin with a whisper, one that might never have been spoken, yet still changes everything. Imagine standing in a quiet room at dusk, the kind where the last light of the day softens every edge and turns even the stillness into something warm. Nothing seems to move, not even the dust drifting in the fading glow. And yet, somewhere in this hush, a single moment waits, a choice so small that, at first glance, it hardly feels like a choice at all. A breath caught for half a second longer, a coin slipping from someone's pocket, a word hesitated on the tip of the tongue. If you were a traveller of time, you might believe these moments are harmless. They are almost invisible. Almost. But the world is more delicate than we tend to admit. It leans on chance, on timing, on the quiet physics of coincidence. And when a chrononaut steps into the past, they aren't stepping into marble or stone. They're stepping into something that breathes, something woven from thousands of threads that cross, twist, and pull against one another. Time, in this sense, is not a rigid beam. It is a pool of water that shifts the moment a fingertip touches it. A whisper that was never spoken might seem insignificant. Perhaps it was a sentence meant to soothe, or a warning murmured at the last possible moment. In one version of events, that whisper calms someone's fear. In another, its absence leaves the fear to grow quietly, unnoticed, changing how someone walks home, who they meet, what they decide. Time unfolds from such moments, not from grand gestures. This is where the idea of the first ripple begins. You might think of a ripple as something dramatic, a wave rolling outward from a stone cast into a lake. But the ripples that shape our lives are often faint, barely more than a tremor. A traveller returning to the past might adjust their footing to avoid a loose cobblestone. It feels insignificant. Yet someone behind them slows their pace to avoid colliding. A third person, noticing the slowed movement, shifts course slightly, stepping into a patch of sunlight instead of shade. This small warmth changes their mood, which changes the tone of a conversation later that day, which changes a choice made that night. And so it spreads. The beauty and the quiet danger of time lies in these soft, nearly invisible sequences. The universe is full of systems that respond dramatically to small beginnings. Weather patterns are famous for this. If you are familiar with the idea often called the butterfly effect, you might picture a tiny creature fluttering its wings on one side of the planet while somewhere far away, storm systems subtly reorganize. Not through magic, but through an intricate sensitivity. A shift in air pressure no one can see, a pathway of winds nudged ever so slightly. In the language of scientists, this is called sensitive dependence on initial conditions, but in the language of dreams and soft thoughts, it simply means that the world listens closely to small things. A chrononaut, even moving gently, cannot escape this truth. Their presence alone becomes a whisper made real. They breathe in a room that once held different air. They step on soil that once held a different pattern of weight. And yet nothing they do seems dramatic. They may not prevent a war or save a life or alter the path of a comet, They may simply pick up a piece of paper someone dropped on the street, or choose not to, and either act becomes a seed for something that was never meant to grow. Consider a tiny moment. A traveller notices a street vendor drop a coin, and they bend to return it. The vendor, touched by the kindness, closes their stall a minute earlier than usual. That minute places them at a crossing just in time to meet an old friend they thought they had lost. The friend invites them for tea, and during that conversation, a new idea forms, an idea that subtly shifts a decision weeks later. That decision affects who is hired for a small job, which affects whose voice enters a meeting, which eventually changes how a single vote is cast in a distant town hall. The world does not swing wildly, but it tilts, ever so slightly, and sometimes a slight tilt is all it takes for a different future to unfold. When people imagine time travel, they often picture grand, dramatic changes, saving a kingdom, preventing an invention, stopping a disaster. But reality, if it ever permitted such journeys, would be shaped through quiet things. A chrononaut's influence would resemble the way twilight changes gradually, too slowly to witness but impossible to deny. The world would shift not like a door slamming but like a curtain being drawn. In the stillness of this first session, the question lingers in the air: how much of our present rests on whispers that were once spoken, or never spoken at all? And if we could return to those whispers to alter them, would we recognise the world shaped in their wake? A single breath, held fractionally longer than before, may be enough for everything to unfold differently. The chrononaut does not need to act boldly. Time listens even to the softest footsteps. If you sit beside a still pond on a windless morning, you might notice how the surface looks almost like polished glass. Nothing moves, nothing disturbs it, but if the smallest leaf falls, even from a tree far above, the water trembles, circles form, widening softly, reaching out farther than the leaf ever touched. This is how delicate the world can be. And when we talk about time, its pathways, its memories, its quiet machinery, this delicacy becomes even more extraordinary. A chrononaut stepping into the past doesn't need to knock over a tower of events to change the future. Sometimes, all it takes is the equivalent of that falling leaf, a whisper, a pause, a breath. There is a story in the history of science that often feels almost myth-like in its simplicity. A meteorologist named Edward Lorenz was working with an early computer, exploring the patterns of weather. One afternoon, he typed in numbers that were nearly identical to those he had used before, just rounded off slightly, a few digits after the decimal removed because he assumed they would not matter. But the model spun out a wildly different sequence of storms and winds. The skies of the simulated world changed as if governed by an entirely new logic, even though the difference in starting values was so tiny that the computer should have ignored it. Lorenz realized that certain systems, especially those as complex as weather, respond dramatically to the smallest disturbances. He later illustrated this idea with the image of a butterfly flapping its wings in one place, subtly shifting the air in a distant region in ways that could eventually influence the path of a storm. But for our quiet exploration, you don't need to picture storms or equations. You can imagine instead the gentle flapping of wings in a room lit by morning light. Small movements, invisible outside that moment, yet part of a broader story. When a chrononaut travels through time, even if they tread softly, they become that butterfly. Their presence shifts the air in ways they may never notice. A conversation begins a moment earlier or later. Someone hesitates before crossing the street. A letter is mailed one day sooner. A lamp is turned off 10 seconds later. These moments accumulate, weaving themselves into the larger fabric of history. In your own life, you may remember moments that felt insignificant at the time but shaped something deeper. A stranger holding the door for you, a friend deciding to call, a sentence overheard by chance. These tiny influences ripple through the hours that follow, sometimes reaching into years. We rarely recognize how far they travel. The chrononaut too steps into this delicate network of near-invisible turns. Imagine that traveller standing in a market decades before the present day. The colours, the voices, the texture of the air, all of it feels familiar and strange at once. They walk slowly, trying not to interfere, but even trying not to interfere is a kind of interference. A child glances in their direction and pauses for half a heartbeat. The parent holding the child's hand adjusts their pace by that same half beat. A vendor calling out an offer shifts their tone because their breath aligns with that adjusted moment. Another customer, hearing the call differently, chooses another stall, and that choice, like the butterfly's wing, begins a chain of subtle rearrangements. In storytelling, the butterfly effect is sometimes described as dramatic, even chaotic. But in the softer landscape of this narration, it is quieter. It is the slow drift of leaves across a river, not a sudden storm. A chrononaut does not need to disrupt the world in loud ways. Time itself magnifies their smallest gestures. Even the simple act of walking through a doorway might create a momentary delay for someone else, setting off a chain of gentle shifts that, years later, influence friendships, careers, or the chance encounter that leads to a future birth. If you think back through the threads of your own life, you might remember one of those subtle intersections, the small decision that changed something quietly. Perhaps you chose a different seat, or took a different path home, or reached for a different book on a shelf. Those choices, like soft currents, carried you toward people you might never have met otherwise. We often say that the big decisions shape us, but the world is arranged so delicately that small ones carry equal power. Time travel simply amplifies this truth. Now imagine the chrononaut realizing this. At first, they might try to step carefully to avoid any action that could ripple outward, but soon they discover that this is impossible. The world responds even to their hesitation. Even choosing not to act becomes its own form of action. Time listens closely, as though every moment has ears, and so the traveller must accept that their presence alone changes something, whether they intend it or not. This is where the story becomes more personal, more introspective. The traveller is not a force of disruption. They are a tiny nudge, barely noticeable yet powerful in the long arc of history. It is a reminder that every person, even without a time machine, already shapes the world in ways they cannot see. We're all butterflies in our own way, brushing against the lives around us with gestures we soon forget. If you let your mind wander for a moment, you might picture an entire timeline as a long path stretching into the distance. Each step along it depends on the steps before. When the chrononaut alters even the faintest detail, the path doesn't break. It bends, ever so slightly. And just as a river that bends early will flow into new valleys far downstream, a timeline that bends by a breath can grow into a different history, a different world. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. The most profound changes often bloom from quiet origins. In this gentle session, the image of the butterfly helps us understand something subtle. Time is deeply sensitive, and perhaps that sensitivity is what makes it precious. The chrononaut's influence is not a matter of erasing or rewriting. It is a matter of sending a small gesture into the vastness of unfolding events, like a feather drifting on a breeze, and even the softest breeze can carry it far. There is a quiet truth about time that often goes unnoticed. The most profound transformations begin in places where nothing seems to happen at all. They hide in pauses, in coincidences so gentle that memory barely holds them. And yet from these moments of near invisibility, entire futures can grow. A chrononaut stepping into the past might believe their influence will be enormous, that changing time requires bold gestures. But more often, the first ripple is small enough to slip beneath awareness, invisible as a breath in cold air. Picture a quiet street in an old town at dawn. The lamps are still burning, casting faint halos around themselves as the sun prepares to rise. A lone traveller steps onto the cobblestones, our chrononaut newly arrived, heartbeat steady, intention soft. They do not speak, they do not act, they do not intervene, at least not in any way they can feel. They simply adjust their coat, perhaps brushing a stray thread from the sleeve. This tiny movement becomes the beginning of something they could never predict. As they slow for that brief moment, someone behind them changes course to avoid passing too closely. This second person walks 2 paces to the left instead of the right, and that subtle shift marks the start of a new thread. It is almost impossible to sense how these tiny redirections unfold. Consider the second pedestrian. Their slight change might place them in a spot where a conversation reaches their ears. A sentence that would have been missed now slips into their thoughts. Maybe the words were nothing more than a comment on the weather, yet something about the tone, the timing, the quietness settles in their mind. That afternoon, when a choice appears at work, they lean a little differently than they would have otherwise. A decision changes, a future shifts. We often imagine time as fragile when confronted with dramatic interference, saving a life, stopping a war, preventing a disaster. But the truth is gentler and more surprising. The fabric of time responds more dramatically to the nearly invisible, to the tiniest disturbance, not because time is weak, but because time is interconnected. It behaves like a forest where every tree's shadow touches another, or like the inside of a clock where small gears guide the motion of great wheels. To understand this without falling into the heavy language of equations, imagine instead a candle. When you breathe near it, even slightly, the flame trembles. The light on the walls dances in response. A chrononaut's presence in the past is like that breath. They do not extinguish the flame, they simply cause a flicker. But in the long span of hours, that flicker can determine how much wax remains at the end of the night. In the long span of history, such a flicker may shape who meets whom, what stories unfold, and which future becomes real. Let us return to our quiet morning street. The third person influenced by the chrononaut's subtle action may be someone who leaves home just a minute later because the adjusted pace changes how they pack their bag. Leaving later means they catch a different tram. On that tram, they sit beside someone they would have never met otherwise. A conversation begins, perhaps polite, perhaps brief, perhaps forgettable. But not every seed that grows into a forest looks remarkable when it is planted. Weeks later, that conversation influences a decision, a job accepted, a journey postponed, a relationship that unfolds. And far down the line, that distant change may affect something as grand as a social movement, or as small and meaningful as a single person's sense of belonging. This is how a ripple travels, not through sudden leaps, but through quiet continuities. Each step is gentle, each shift is soft. Time does not twist violently, it reclines slightly, like a tree adjusting to the breeze. A chrononaut rarely witnesses the eventual consequences of these small disturbances. The world they leave behind may look unchanged, because time takes its time revealing the paths it has altered. There is a common belief in science fiction that changing the past means rewriting history with a kind of loudness, changing great events or altering famous lives. But the real power rests in the delicate rearrangement of ordinary days. The chrononaut's journey makes this clear. They may not prevent an empire's fall or inspire a revolution, yet their influence may slowly percolate through families, through workplaces, through community gatherings. It may nudge someone's courage, shift someone's fear, or encourage someone to take a chance they otherwise wouldn't. And sometimes, the ripple leads to outcomes that look, at first, as if nothing changed at all. The chrononaut returns to their own time and sees familiar buildings, familiar roads, familiar faces. Nothing seems misplaced, but underneath, the foundation has moved. The relationships between events have rearranged themselves. The story behind each familiar detail has been altered, even if the ending appears the same. It is like reading a book whose final chapter hasn't changed, but discovering that all the earlier chapters have taken different paths to reach the same conclusion. In another reality, the chrononaut's ripple may unfold into an entirely different world. Perhaps the person who overheard the stray sentence becomes an inventor, or chooses not to invent something. Perhaps a friendship blossoms where once there was none. Perhaps a letter is never sent, or a cold morning conversation lifts a sadness that would have shaped a lifetime. History is full of hinges disguised as small choices. You can imagine a timeline as a long winding river. The chrononaut's whisper of influence is like placing a single pebble in that river. Today, the water flows the same. Tomorrow, the change is imperceptible. But miles downstream, the shape of the riverbank has shifted. A slightly altered current wears down a different stone. That stone's shape influences how water moves around it. In time, the entire landscape changes in ways the pebble could never have predicted. This is the profound quiet of the first ripple. It changes nothing in the moment and everything in the long weave of days. And the chrononaut standing at the centre of this unfolding must live with the awareness that even their stillness is capable of stirring the world. If you have ever watched falling dominoes, you might remember the quiet pleasure of seeing one piece tip forward and gently touch the next. The motion continues in a soft rhythmic pattern, each tile affecting the one beside it. What makes this image beautiful is how simple it is. One motion leads to another. But in the world of human lives, the dominoes are not arranged in a straight line. They form branching paths, circular patterns, webs that weave into webs. When a chrononaut touches the past, even with the gentlest intention, the first domino doesn't fall onto just one more. It touches hundreds, perhaps thousands, moving out in directions no one could predict, each affecting the next in ways that feel almost impossible to trace. Imagine again the chrononaut standing in a market or a quiet street, taking a single step, creating a pause, offering a small gesture of kindness. That action may feel isolated, but life does not unfold in isolation. Each person in that moment carries their own story, their own hopes, fears, and choices. These stories are connected to others, who in turn are connected to others still. It is in this web of lives that the true nature of a ripple reveals itself. The chrononaut's action begins in one person, travels through a conversation, shifts a mood, alters a relationship, nudges a decision, and continues outward. To see this more clearly, picture a tree. Not the trunk alone, but the entire branchwork hidden beneath the soil. When a single drop of water reaches one root tip, the entire network absorbs it. A change in one root affects the nourishment of the whole tree. Human society is built on similar hidden connections. Someone who changes their morning routine influences the timing of the bus they catch, which influences who sits beside them, which influences a shared glance, which may influence a friendship or a conflict. The ripple spreads far beyond the first route. Let us imagine a small example, something so gentle that the chrononaut might not notice its significance. Suppose they pass someone who appears tired, and with the faintest kindness in their expression, they cause that person to feel noticed, if only for a moment. The person's steps lighten a little. They decide, without fully understanding why, to stop for a warm drink before heading to work. This delays them by just enough time that they avoid a stressful conversation with a co-worker who would have been in a hurried mood. Days later, this co-worker, still unaware of the avoided friction, makes a decision from a calmer place, leading to a more compassionate choice in a group meeting. A single softened emotion ripples through an entire professional environment, shifting the outcome of projects, relationships, or future opportunities. Meanwhile, the person who received the chrononaut's silent kindness carries a slightly altered sense of the day. They smile at a stranger in line. They respond more gently to a message from a friend. That friend, feeling supported, chooses not to cancel an evening gathering and invites someone new. That new person meets someone else, forming a bond neither of them expected. The chrononaut's presence began a thread that now extends into a sequence of relationships that might shape families for generations, not through grand gestures, but through tiny reassurances that travel quietly through human hearts. The idea of immediate consequences for the chrononaut, therefore, is almost misleading. Nothing appears immediate. Nothing announces itself loudly. Yet consequences form instantly, the moment someone breathes differently or sees the world through slightly altered eyes. We live in a network where small tones shift entire songs, and this pattern does not end with people. Consider ecosystems, cities, and technological developments. A chrononaut's ripple might influence someone who later chooses to pursue a different field of study, or decides to accept a job in a distant town, or joins a community project they otherwise would have missed. These decisions, tiny on their own, feed into much larger structures. A person who chooses a scientific path may contribute years later to a discovery. Someone who chooses a political path may shape laws that affect thousands. Someone who decides to stay home instead of travelling may be there for a conversation that prevents a long-lasting misunderstanding. In a world held together by countless threads, even one invisible gesture has the potential to shift the pattern of the entire tapestry. We tend to think that big events require big causes, but history tells a different story. Many turning points have begun with someone leaving the house a minute earlier, walking a different route, looking up at the right moment, or choosing not to speak a particular thought aloud. The chrononaut amplifies these everyday turning points merely by existing in the past. A slight change in their breathing may change someone else's timing by seconds, and seconds, in the long run of time, can be significant. If you've ever wondered how fragile our reality is, consider this. Most of the connections that hold the world together are invisible. Friendships, opportunities, inventions, movements. They are built on coincidences and echoes. When the chrononaut steps into this delicate web, time does not break. Instead, it rearranges itself softly, like a curtain drifting in a breeze. And this is where the image of the domino returns, but altered. For the chrononaut, the first domino doesn't fall in a straight path. It falls into a field of other dominoes arranged in patterns more intricate than any design drawn by hand. Each piece touches not one, but many. Some reactions fade gently, stopping after a short distance. Others travel far, igniting stories that shape entire generations. Perhaps the chrononaut never intended this. Perhaps they hoped to pass unnoticed, to observe without disturbing. But time is both patient and responsive. It accepts every gesture, every hesitation, every footstep, and folds it into the unfolding of reality. The web tightens, shifts, and pulls. The world adapts quietly and continuously. Some ripples never become visible in the present moment. They remain buried beneath the surface, shaping events indirectly, like currents deep in the ocean. Others bloom into noticeable changes, a chance meeting that launches a company, a missed moment that avoids a crisis, a conversation that becomes a memory passed across decades. In all these cases, the first domino is so small that even the chrononaut cannot see it fall, yet everything that follows can be traced back to that single, unremarkable moment. This is the power of the web of connected fates. It reveals that our world, which often appears solid, consistent, and inevitable, is in truth a living structure made from delicate interactions. And when time travelers step into this structure, they become part of the web, not separate from it, not above it, but woven into its threads like anyone else. Their smallest actions blend into the fabric, shaping futures they may never witness. There is a gentle belief many people hold without ever saying it aloud, that kindness is simple, contained, something that lives only in the moment it's given. A smile offered to a stranger, a door held open, a soft word spoken when someone most needs it. These gestures seem small, as if they exist only inside the brief breath of time in which they occur. But in the quiet language of the universe, kindness is rarely small. It is a turning point, a subtle redirection of someone's inner world. And in the long weave of time, even one shift of the heart can echo farther than the person offering it ever realizes. For a chrononaut visiting the past, kindness becomes something more powerful still, a gesture that not only softens a moment, but alters the rhythm of unfolding history. Imagine the traveller standing in a past they do not belong to, watching people move through their ordinary routines. They do not wish to disrupt anything. Perhaps they even try to blend in, to leave no trace. Yet time is permeable in ways we rarely recognise. The moment they breathe the same air as the people whose lives are about to ripple from their presence, the past becomes aware of them. The way they stand, the way their eyes meet another's, the way they hesitate for a heartbeat. Each of these becomes a seed of possibility. One day, the chrononaut notices a person sitting alone on a bench, looking weary in a way that is deeper than simple tiredness. Something in the person's posture, a slight bend in the shoulders, a sigh that escapes in a way they didn't mean, stirs compassion. Without planning it, the traveller offers a small gesture, perhaps a nod of acknowledgement or a gentle smile that says without words, "I see you." It seems harmless, even forgettable. But kindness rarely ends where it begins. The person on the bench, feeling noticed, stands up with a little more steadiness. Maybe that tiny sense of being seen encourages them to take a different route home, or to speak to someone they usually avoid. Perhaps they decide to visit a friend they have not spoken to in months. This reunion becomes the start of a slow healing in a relationship long strained by misunderstanding. And days later, that friend makes a decision with a calmer heart, one that influences a workplace, or a family, or a community gathering. A single softened glance from the chrononaut has begun to travel through the world like a soft breeze moving from tree to tree. Kindness also carries another dimension in the landscape of time travel. It offers the chrononaut a moment of temptation. If even a small gesture can ripple so far, what happens if they offer something more direct? What if they step forward to prevent a painful event they know is coming? What if they intervene to stop an argument, or to warn someone about a choice they will soon regret? Here, time reveals a curious habit of its own. Some theories suggest that time resists dramatic changes, that it bends in subtle ways to ensure certain outcomes still occur. This idea, which scholars describe with the formal phrase self-consistency, can be softened into a simple metaphor. Time is like a river flowing toward the sea. You can step into it, slow its current for a moment, even splash water in new directions. But eventually, the river finds its way back to its original path. When the chrononaut tries to prevent a small accident, perhaps reaching out to steady someone who is about to slip, they may succeed in that moment. The fall is avoided. The person continues on unhurt. But later, through a different chain of events, something else occurs that leads them to the same destination. Maybe they trip on a different day, or encounter another moment of misfortune that changes their plans in a similar way. Time appears to rearrange itself, absorbing the kindness but preserving the essential flow. The traveller realises that time is willing to shift gently, but not always willing to rewrite its deeper currents. Yet this does not diminish the value of the traveller's actions, far from it. Even when the larger contours of time remain intact, kindness reshapes the emotional landscape of those who receive it. A person who feels cared for moves differently through their day. They speak with more patience. They decide from a place touched by warmth rather than fear. And although this warmth might not change the grand arc of history, it changes the inner arcs, the quiet stories that make life tender and meaningful. To understand this, imagine a hallway lined with closed doors. Behind each door is a version of the future. Some are brighter, filled with possibilities. Some are dimmer, more burdened. When the chrononaut offers kindness, they do not force a door open or shut. Instead, they gently shift which door feels easier for someone to choose. A person who feels encouraged may open a door they would have avoided. A person who feels dismissed may turn away from a door that might have offered healing. Time may guide the larger path, but kindness shapes how we walk it. There is another quiet truth the chrononaut learns. Kindness is one of the few actions that can ripple outward without causing harm. Many interventions, even well-intentioned, carry the risk of unintended consequences. Changing someone's path might alter hundreds of lives they would have touched. Preventing an argument might prevent a catharsis that someone needed. But offering gentleness rarely imposes. It empowers rather than disrupts. It invites rather than redirects. And in a timeline as sensitive as a spider's web, where each thread leads into countless others, gentleness becomes one of the only safe ways to exist in the past. The chrononaut discovers that they do not need to fix anything. They do not need to steer events. They simply need to treat every moment as fragile, every person as part of a story stretching far beyond their sight. Over time, this awareness changes the traveller as much as it changes the world around them. Perhaps this is the most profound ripple of all. The chrononaut, who arrived believing they were an observer, becomes more present, more compassionate, more aware of how delicate the world truly is. They move through the past like someone carrying a lantern in a dark room, careful not to disturb yet illuminating small corners wherever they walk. And when they eventually return to their own time, they carry this gentleness with them, shaping their present just as they once shaped the past. Kindness, it seems, does not belong to any single moment. It threads itself through time, touching lives long after the gesture is forgotten. For a traveller between eras, it becomes the one language understood by the past, the present, and the future alike. There is a quiet truth hidden beneath the surface of every decision we make. Even our most loving intentions can wander into places we never expected. A soft word spoken at the right moment can lift someone's spirit, but a soft word spoken at the wrong moment may alter their path in ways neither person understands. This is part of being human. And for a chrononaut, someone who moves through time with the weight of knowledge and the uncertainty of possibility, this truth becomes even more profound. Their touch on the past can illuminate, soothe, or shift someone's future, but it can also cast shadows they didn't mean to create. When the traveller first steps into the past, they carry the hope that good intentions will always lead to good outcomes. It feels natural to believe this. After all, kindness is gentle. Compassion feels pure. But time is made of interwoven threads, tightly bound and often tangled. A tug on one thread can cause tension in places far away. Even soft gestures carry with them possibilities that are as unpredictable as they are expansive. Imagine the chrononaut walking through a quiet street, noticing a child chasing a ball toward the edge of a road. Instinctively, they step forward to intervene, pulling the child back from danger. The moment ends well. The child is safe, the guardian relieved, the traveller quietly proud. In the immediate present, it feels like a victory. But the ripples are only beginning, because the child's near miss becomes a story told at the dinner table that evening, shaping how their family talks about safety. That conversation leads someone to make a protective choice days later, perhaps one that shifts the child's future into a different direction. Maybe that choice makes them more cautious. Maybe it leads them to avoid an opportunity they would have bravely taken otherwise. Or perhaps it sends their life along a quieter route, exchanging one dream for another. None of these outcomes are wrong, none are tragic, but they are different. And sometimes difference is all it takes for a life to change. The chrononaut begins to understand that time is not a straight corridor where one event leads predictably to the next. It is a living landscape where each movement touches countless others. Even the intention to help, something so deeply human can usher in unforeseen twists. A gentle correction made in the past might remove a moment of hardship that would have inspired resilience later on. A whisper meant to comfort might prevent someone from speaking the truth they needed to confront. A warning offered too early might stop a person from making a mistake they needed in order to grow. This is the paradox of compassion in a world bound by time. Every action, even loving ones, carries its own shadow, a possibility that something unintended may grow from it. The chrononaut begins to walk more quietly, aware not only of what they offer, but of what might follow. Perhaps they decide to help a struggling merchant by buying something small from their stall. A harmless choice, barely a moment's thought. The merchant, encouraged by the sale, decides to stay open an extra hour. That extra hour leads them to miss a meeting with a friend, which shifts the friend's evening plans. Those plans affect other encounters, and slowly, through a path no one could foresee, the chrononaut's kindness may be the thread that enables a new rivalry between people who might not have crossed paths otherwise. What began as a single coin exchanged in goodwill becomes a seed for tension far in the future. This is not because the world is cruel, it is because the world is interconnected in ways too complex for any one mind to follow. A change made with care may intersect with someone else's fear, anger, exhaustion, or confusion, and the result may be something the traveller never meant to create. To soften this idea, imagine a garden. You water one plant hoping to help it grow, but the extra water seeps into the soil and feeds another seed nearby, a seed you did not plant. That seed grows into something unexpected, perhaps beautiful, perhaps invasive. You did not choose it, yet your action nurtured it. This is how the garden of time behaves. Each drop of water, each gesture, each word nourishes not only the moment you touch, but others that lie hidden beneath the surface. For the chrononaut, the realization becomes a lesson in humility. They begin to see that they cannot control the unfolding of the world. They cannot predict which seeds will sprout or which roots will intertwine with others beneath the soil. They come to understand that their role is not to craft a perfect outcome, but to act with awareness, to offer kindness without the expectation that it will shape the world exactly as they intend. This humility deepens into something else: acceptance. Acceptance that time has its own wisdom, its own tendencies. Acceptance that sometimes even the gentlest actions lead to consequences no one could foresee. Acceptance that intention and outcome do not always walk hand in hand. An acceptance that the shadows are not punishments. They are simply the natural texture of a world built from billions of choices, each influencing the next. Yet this understanding does not make the chrononaut fearful. It makes them compassionate in a deeper way. They learn to move through the past with softness, not because they fear altering the future, but because they honour its complexity. They understand that every life, every moment, every thread in the fabric of time is delicate, and they walk with the humility of someone carrying something fragile in their hands. Imagine them standing at a crossroads at dusk, listening to the murmur of voices fading into the evening. They no longer act quickly or impulsively. Instead, they pause, breathe, and ask themselves not, "How can I fix this?" but, "How can I be present here in a way that honours this moment?" They realise the future is not theirs to sculpt. It belongs to the people who live it, shaped by their own choices, joys, and mistakes. The shadow of the unforeseen remains, but it no longer frightens the traveller. It reminds them that life is not a puzzle to solve, but a story to respect. And in the gentle glow of that understanding, they begin to trust both the light and the shadow as essential parts of time's quiet unfolding. There is a moment in every chrononaut's journey when they discover that time, for all its softness and sensitivity, has a quiet will of its own. Up until now, our traveller has learned how small gestures ripple outward, how kindness can reshape futures, and how unintended consequences hide in the tiniest corners of a day. but eventually they encounter something unexpected, an event they try to change that refuses to move, no matter how gently or deliberately they intervene. It is here, in this strange stillness, that they begin to sense a deeper design beneath time's surface. Imagine the chrononaut arriving at a familiar crossroads in the past. Perhaps they know a difficult moment is about to occur, an accident, a loss, a conversation that will alter someone's path for years. They wait, watching from the edge of the scene, heart steady, breath held with quiet intention. When the moment comes, they step in with care, nudging the situation away from the pain they know is coming. And for a moment, it appears to work. The person is guided safely away from the danger. A sharp word is softened. A missed opportunity is reclaimed. The traveller exhales, believing they have altered history. But as the hours unfold, something subtle happens. The danger they hope to prevent returns in a different form, unexpected, indirect, arriving from an angle they never anticipated. Perhaps the person they saved from the accident later slips in a different place, sustaining a smaller but still meaningful injury. Perhaps the softened conversation leads to words that are misunderstood later, igniting a conflict of a different shape. Perhaps the opportunity reclaimed closes another door the traveller didn't even know existed. The original event doesn't stay gone. It rearranges itself, as though time has quietly folded around the chrononaut's touch, absorbing the interference like cloth smoothing over a wrinkle. This gentle resilience is part of a way of thinking about time that scholars have tried to describe using ideas and diagrams, but which we can understand more simply. Picture time as a river flowing toward the sea. If you place a stone in the water, the current shifts around it, but the river still moves toward its destination. Even if you block the path, the water finds another route. It may take a longer turn, widen into a pool, or carve a new side channel, but eventually it will reach the sea it was always flowing toward. When the chrononaut intervenes in the past, they place a stone in the river of time. They change the flow, but not the destination. Events may reshuffle, circumstances may be delayed, outcomes may be softened or sharpened, but the broad shape of what was meant to happen still finds its way forward. Time absorbs the interference and bends around it, keeping its deeper pattern intact. Standing in the aftermath of one of these moments, the traveller feels a gentle confusion. They believe the past was malleable, open to alteration. And in a small sense, it is. They can change details, rearrange pathways, alter moods and conversations. But the larger threads seem to resist being rewritten. It is as though time contains a memory of itself, a quiet insistence that certain events, in one form or another, must occur. This realization leads the chrononaut into a new understanding of loops in time. Not loops in the mechanical sense, where one relives a day over and over, but loops of cause and effect that fold back on themselves. They begin to see how some events exist because of the very attempts to prevent them. A person is saved from a fall, only to later be guided to a place where they meet someone who alters their fate. A disagreement avoided in the morning blooms into a misunderstanding in the evening. The chrononaut's action becomes part of the very chain they tried to break. It is a strange feeling to recognize that one's intervention was not a disruption, but a thread woven into the original design. The traveller begins to sense that the timeline is not linear, but gently curved, like a ribbon looping through space. Their presence was not an intrusion, but something that was always part of the loop. They were meant to arrive, meant to intervene, meant to become the reason an event unfolded exactly as it did. Their role was not to stop the story, but to complete it. This understanding brings with it a quiet peace. The chrononaut realizes they are not fighting against time, they are participating in it. The loops are not traps, they are reflections of how moments fold back into themselves, how beginnings and endings intertwine. Time is not resisting them, it is welcoming them into a story already imagined. To understand this more gently, imagine a piece of fabric stretched across a frame. If you press lightly with your finger, the cloth dips inward. When you release it, the fabric relaxes back toward its shape. But in the brief moment of pressure, the fibers shift around your touch. The cloth holds a memory of the movement. You changed it, but you did not undo it. Time behaves in a similar way. It acknowledges the chrononaut's presence, folds around their choices, and then returns to the larger pattern that holds the world together. This is the heart of the universe of loops. Events that seem avoidable turn out to be woven into the fabric of the timeline. Attempts to prevent them become the very reason they unfold. A chrononaut who steps into the past may discover that nothing they do is truly outside the story. Their presence is not an interruption. It is a quiet fulfillment. And in this recognition, the traveller finds something comforting. They do not need to carry the weight of trying to fix everything. They do not need to fear that one misstep will unravel reality. Time is far more patient, far more adaptable than it appears. It bends, it folds, it circles back, but it never breaks. Every loop is part of a larger tapestry, one that the chrononaut has unknowingly been part of all along. There is a moment after the chrononaut has witnessed time bend softly around their attempts to change it, when a new possibility begins to whisper through their thoughts. If some events refuse to be altered, if time reshapes itself to preserve certain outcomes, then what about the changes that do take hold? What about the moments where the traveller sees the future shift in ways that cannot be undone? Where do those new paths go? Do they overwrite what once existed, like ink spilled across a page? Or do they grow quietly beside it, like a second stem sprouting from a shared root? To explore this, the chrononaut begins to imagine time not as a single river but as a great tree. A trunk rises from deep soil, thick and sturdy, carrying the story of everything that has ever been. From this trunk, branches extend, some wide, some narrow, some reaching into sunlight, others dipping into shadow. At first glance, it seems like all the branches belong to one continuous path, but upon closer look, each one splits again and again. A small fork becomes a larger fork. A gentle curve becomes a divide, and every branch, no matter how unique its shape, still connects to the same trunk. This tree becomes the chrononaut's quiet metaphor for branching realities, not parallel worlds filled with noise and contradiction, but gentle variations of the same story, each branch holding a version of events grown from a slightly different choice, a slightly shifted moment of hesitation, a slightly altered breath. Imagine the traveller standing in a long hallway lined with doors. Behind each door is a room filled with a different possibility. In one room, a conversation ended early. In another, it continued. In another, someone laughed. In another, someone left. The chrononaut begins to understand that when they make a change in the past, a change that truly sticks, it does not erase the room that existed before. Instead, it creates a new room beside it. Both rooms continue to exist. Both belong to the house of time. But the chrononaut, by their presence, chooses which room they walk into. This understanding carries a strange comfort. Nothing is destroyed, nothing is replaced. Instead, time opens a neighbouring corridor, a space that holds the shape of the traveller's choices without erasing what once was. The chrononaut does not overwrite the story. They simply step sideways into another chapter. For someone moving through time, this soft branching becomes visible in small, intimate ways. Imagine the chrononaut meeting a familiar person, someone whose life they touched years before. Their face, their voice, their gestures all feel known. But something subtle is different. Perhaps their laugh carries a hint of a memory the traveller does not share. Perhaps their eyes linger on something that once mattered deeply in the original timeline. These differences are not dramatic. They are like notes in a melody shifted ever so slightly, forming a harmony that feels familiar but not identical. At first, the chrononaut wonders if their memory is fading, or if the world is misaligned. But slowly they understand the truth. They are standing in a branch of time that grew from their previous actions. The person they meet is not wrong or changed. They are simply the version shaped by the traveller's presence. Their life unfolded along a different branch of the tree, one that the chrononaut helped create. This realization carries both beauty and melancholy. Beauty because it means that every choice creates new rooms where different versions of life can flourish. Melancholy because the chrononaut can never return to the exact room they left behind. They can revisit places, retrace steps, even see familiar faces, but the subtle differences remain. The past they once knew continues to exist elsewhere, in a branch they can no longer reach. To understand this gently, imagine a book with many chapters. Some chapters lead seamlessly into others, some diverge into alternate paths, some offer side stories. When the chrononaut changes a moment, they are not tearing a page from the book. They are writing a new chapter in the margins, one that becomes part of their personal reading, even though the original text still stands untouched in another corner of the library. And so, the traveller begins to accept that time is not a single line stretching forward. It is a library of quiet rooms, a tree of branching limbs, a book with countless unwritten pages waiting for the slightest choice to bring them into being. They see how a change as small as returning a lost item or offering a word of reassurance can send a new branch into growth. A conversation extended by a few seconds becomes a bridge to a different future. A moment of silence held a little longer becomes the seed of a new direction. The chrononaut walks through these rooms with a soft awareness. They touch the branches gently, knowing that each shift creates a world they may never fully understand. They feel the weight of choice, not heavy, but sincere. They move with a recognition that time is generous, offering all these possibilities without destroying the ones they leave behind. There is a quiet generosity in this picture of branching timelines. It suggests that the past is not fragile, it is abundant. It holds not one story, but many. And the chrononaut, rather than damaging the timeline, becomes part of its growth. Their presence is not an erasure, but an invitation for time to bloom in new directions. As they walk through these new branches, the traveller feels something unexpected, a sense of peace. They are no longer trying to control outcomes or prevent events from happening. They are no longer fighting against time's current. Instead, they are discovering new paths, new stories, new echoes of the world they once knew. They realise that time does not demand decisions of perfection. It only asks for presence, for awareness, for gentle steps along its many corridors. And in this understanding, the chrononaut begins to trust the branching of reality. They do not fear the new rooms. They do not mourn the old ones. They simply walk, lantern in hand, through the expanding library of possibility, knowing that each door they open leads not to destruction, but to another version of the same great story, growing quietly from the same trunk of existence. There is a moment in every long journey where the traveller pauses, not because they are tired, but because the path itself invites stillness. After moving through branches of possibility, and rivers that bend around stones and loops that quietly fold back into themselves, the chrononaut arrives at a different kind of understanding. It does not come as a revelation or a flash of insight. It arrives as a gentle hum beneath everything, like a lantern slowly illuminating a room that was always there. This is the beginning of their encounter with the idea that time may not be something that changes at all. It may simply be. You can imagine time as a great landscape, not flat and not linear, but vast, stretching outward in every direction, filled with hills and valleys, and moments rising like distant peaks. In this landscape, the past is not behind us, and the future is not ahead. They exist beside us, above us, beneath us, woven into the terrain like layers of sediment. Each moment, whether ancient or yet to come, is part of the same landscape. A traveller who stands in this view of time does not move through it as one would walk down a road. They drift across rooms already built, corridors already carved, paths already formed long before their footsteps ever touch them. This way of seeing time is soft, steady, and comforting. It suggests that nothing is ever truly lost. A moment from childhood, a conversation long ended, a choice made years ago. They do not vanish. They remain, like rooms in a mansion whose doors we rarely open. You may forget the exact sound of laughter from someone you once loved, but that laughter still exists somewhere in the landscape of time, waiting in the room where it was created. Time holds everything gently, preserving each moment even as we drift away from it. For the chrononaut, stepping into the past now feels different. It no longer feels like rewriting a story or altering a path. It feels like visiting a place that already exists, like walking back into a childhood home and discovering that the furniture is still arranged the same way. The sunlight still falls through the window in a familiar pattern, and the air still holds the echoes of a long ago conversations. In this view, time travel is not an act of changing history, it is an act of navigation. The traveller is not a sculptor reshaping clay, but a wanderer moving from room to room in a house that was always built this way. This understanding softens something inside them. They realise that all the fear of breaking the timeline, of making the wrong move or disturbing something fragile, is a misunderstanding. Time does not break. It does not shatter. It simply contains. Every event, every possibility, every branch, every loop, they all coexist in this vast and quiet structure. The chrononaut's presence does not carve new corridors into the mansion of time. It merely leads them through hallways that were already there, waiting. To make this illusion of change feel more familiar, imagine reading a book. The pages are all written, the first chapter, the middle, the last. You experience the story page by page, thinking the tale unfolds as you turn each leaf. But the entire book already exists in your hands. The ending is as present on the page as the beginning, even before you read it. When you flip back to reread an earlier chapter, you're not changing the story. You're simply shifting your place within it. Time, in this gentle picture, is much the same. We experience moments one by one, believing the future is unwritten and the past untouchable. But perhaps every chapter of our lives already stands in quiet stillness, bound into the same volume. The chrononaut, stepping backward or forward, is simply turning to a different page. This perspective brings a strange sense of peace. It means mistakes are not moments that must be erased. They are part of the pattern. Joys are not fleeting. They are rooms forever lit somewhere in the house of time. Losses are not vanished. They are preserved in the soft corners of the landscape, where memory and existence overlap. The chrononaut begins to reflect on events they once wished to change. Instead of seeing them as wounds that should have been avoided, they begin to see them as features of the terrain, like a steep hill or a narrow path. Challenging, yes, but still part of the journey and still part of the landscape's beauty. They start to sense that meaning does not come from erasing pain, but from understanding its place in the greater whole. It also means that the future too has a quiet stillness. The traveller may step into a moment yet to come and find it fully formed, not because it was predetermined in a rigid sense, but because it has always existed alongside the present. Choices do not vanish. They crystallise into their own rooms as soon as they are made, joining the architecture of the block. The chrononaut can wander through these rooms, but they cannot remove them. They can only understand them more deeply. To visualise this, imagine a lantern carried through the mansion of time. Wherever the light touches, details emerge, the shape of old memories, the texture of future possibilities, the quiet contours of moments that have already happened but remain unvisited. The traveller is not altering these rooms, they are illuminating them. Their presence does not change the structure, it simply reveals it. This understanding transforms how the chrononaut sees their own life. they begin to sense that even their regrets, their triumphs, their doubts, and their hopes are pieces of a larger mosaic. Each fragment is held in place by the mansion's quiet, patient architecture. And because everything is preserved somewhere within the great landscape of time, nothing is ever isolated or lost. In this newfound stillness, the chrononaut recognizes something profound. Change is not always something that happens to time. Sometimes change is simply the way we move through it. And as they continue their journey, they carry with them the comforting thought that every moment, past, present, or future, is tucked safely into the fabric of time like glowing windows in a house that never truly goes dark. There comes a moment, somewhere along the chrononauts wandering through past corridors and quiet branches of possibility, when the journey turns inward. After walking through rooms of time that were always there, after touching small moments that blossomed into unexpected futures, after feeling how loops and branches hold their own quiet logic, the traveller eventually wonders something deeper, not about the world, but about themselves. If the past can shift, if entire versions of reality can unfold differently, if memories can unravel or reweave themselves depending on which path is taken, then who exactly is the self that travels through it all? It begins gently, almost without the chrononaut noticing. They step into a familiar place in the past, a cafe they once visited, a childhood street, a park bench where an old conversation once shaped the course of their life. But something is different. The light falls at a slightly different angle. The sounds carry a faint unfamiliarity. A person they once knew walks past with a posture subtly altered, their expression tinted by experiences the chrononaut does not recognize. It's a small shift, quiet and harmless, yet it stirs something unsettling. The traveller realizes this is not their past. It is a past, one branch of many, altered by ripples they themselves set in motion. And suddenly the traveller is left with a question that has no easy answer. If my past is no longer the same, am I still the person shaped by it? To explore this, imagine memory as a collection of small stones arranged in a pattern on the ground. Each stone represents a conversation, a decision, a moment of joy or fear. When you stand above them, the pattern forms a shape that feels like you, your personality, your beliefs, your sense of self. Now imagine someone gently nudging one of the stones, then another. The pattern shifts slightly. Does it still represent you? Perhaps. But if enough stones are moved, if enough ripples travel back through time, the pattern changes enough that even you might not recognize it. For the chrononaut, this experience becomes strangely physical. They begin to notice that certain memories feel lighter, like pages in a book that once held text but now hold faint outlines instead. Not erased, just rearranged. When they look back on their childhood, perhaps a comforting voice they remembered belonged to a different person now. When they recall a moment of failure or triumph, perhaps its cause has changed, shaped by a different set of circumstances. These shifts are small at first, but as the traveller moves through branching timelines, the cumulative effect becomes undeniable. Their memories drift slightly out of alignment with the world around them. A street they once walked feels familiar but not identical. A friend they once trusted looks at them with recognition, but the emotions behind that recognition carry a different history. The chrononaut begins to sense a gentle mismatch between their inner story and the outer world, like reading a book whose illustrations have been replaced but whose words remain the same. This is where the idea of identity becomes delicate. We often think of ourselves as anchored by our memories, the conversations that shaped us, the mistakes that taught us, the people who held our hands at the right moments. But if those memories shift, or if the events that produced them unfold differently, does the self still remain intact? Or does identity flow like the river of time itself, shaped not by what happened, but by the thread of consciousness weaving through it. To understand this more softly, imagine a tree growing on a hillside. Its branches stretch toward the sun, shaped by wind, rain, and soil. If the conditions had been slightly different, if the wind blew harder one year or the soil held more water, the shape of the tree would be different. But the tree would still be the tree. Its essence would remain, even though its form shifted. In this way, the chrononaut begins to understand themselves. They are not defined by the exact pattern of branches, but by the deeper root that carries their awareness through every version of time. Still, the feeling of misalignment lingers. The traveller knows that in another branch, one they can no longer reach, there exists a version of themselves shaped by a childhood conversation that no longer happened here. In another branch, a moment of courage bloomed earlier. In another, later. In another, not at all. And each of those versions would walk through the world differently. They would make different choices, love different people, carry different regrets. This realization brings both wonder and melancholy. There is beauty in knowing that the self is bigger than any single path, that identity can stretch across branches like a melody played in different keys. But there is sadness too, in recognizing that some versions of oneself are forever out of reach. The chrononaut begins to feel what might be called temporal vertigo, a sense of standing between selves, each real yet none complete, each possible yet none absolute. The question deepens. If a chrononaut alters the past enough to change who they would have become, what happens to the original self? Does it dissolve into the landscape of time? Does it continue on another branch the traveller cannot follow? Or does it linger inside them as a faint echo, like a dream remembered upon waking? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one identity over another, but in acknowledging that identity itself is a river. It flows, adapts, reshapes its banks. What makes the chrononaut themselves is not the exact memories they carry, but the consciousness that experiences them, the awareness that walks from one moment to the next, even as the details shift. And so, the traveller learns something quietly profound. You are not your past. You're the awareness that moves through whatever past you happen to have. This realization softens the chrononaut's fear. They begin to trust that who they are does not vanish when the story changes. It simply evolves. The past may shift, but the self continues to walk, guided not by fixed events, but by the light they carry within, steady, even as time reshapes the world around them. There is a gentle moment in the chrononaut's journey when they pause, not because they are lost, but because the very idea of being on the right path becomes blurry. After moving through loops that fold back on themselves, and branches that stretch into countless possible futures, and landscapes of time that feel already woven from beginning to end, the traveller eventually asks a question that echoes softly in the quiet. If time can bend, branch, or stand still depending on where you look, is anything truly inevitable? The question doesn't arrive loudly. It comes like a breeze that finds them during a moment of stillness. Perhaps the chrononaut is sitting on a bench in a version of the present they no longer fully recognise. People pass by, familiar yet subtly different. A child laughs in a tone that feels one breath out of sync with the memory they carry. A street performer plays a melody that once belonged to another timeline. Everything is the same, and yet everything is slightly rearranged. It's in this quiet dissonance that the traveller begins to wonder whether fate is a line drawn in ink, or simply the path most easily noticed. At first, inevitability feels sharply defined. When the chrononauts saw time bending itself around their interventions, absorbing contradictions like cloth smoothing out a crease, they felt the pull of a fixed world. Some moments seemed destined, refusing to be erased no matter how gently the traveller tried. A meeting between two strangers, a loss that shaped a life, an invention that transformed an era. These events felt like stones in a river that could not be moved, only circled around. It was easy then to believe that time had a will, a preference, perhaps even a story it wished to tell. But then came the branches. Small choices opened new rooms. Quiet gestures blossomed into alternate futures. The chrononaut walked down paths that were never meant to intersect, met people whose lives unfolded in ways that were impossible in other branches. Here, destiny began to feel less like a single line, and more like a garden filled with many winding trails. Different choices led to different outcomes, none of which were wrong, all of which were versions of reality given room to grow. In these branching timelines, inevitability loosened, becoming softer, more forgiving. It felt like possibility, not certainty. As the traveller reflects on these two pictures, the fixed river and the branching garden, they begin to see that inevitability is not a single truth. It is a matter of perspective, shaped by which doorway of time one looks through. Imagine a mountain range stretching far into the distance. From one angle, the peaks align in a straight line, and the eye is drawn to a single direction. From another angle, the mountains fan out into many layers, each with its own path and valley. Both views are true, neither contradicts the other, they simply reveal different shapes of the same landscape. In fixed time theories, where loops fold neatly into themselves and time resists large changes, events feel woven. The chrononaut's attempts to prevent something only become part of the reason it happens. In this gentle picture, inevitability is like a melody returning to its root note no matter how many variations it plays along the way. The traveller may wander through the harmonies, but the song finds its ending. In branching time theories, where choices bloom into new possibilities, inevitability becomes something else entirely. The traveller sees paths diverge like delicate veins in a leaf. The future is not a destination waiting ahead, but a constellation of possibilities waiting to be chosen. Each choice opens a room. Each hesitation closes another. In this picture, inevitability dissolves. The world is not bound to one outcome. It grows around each decision like vines finding their way along a trellis. And then, layered atop these, is the block universe view, where all moments exist side by side, already formed, quiet and patient. Here, inevitability is a gentle illusion, created not by time itself, but by the way consciousness walks through it. Because we only ever experience one moment at a time, the future feels unknown and the past feels fixed. But to the landscape of time, every moment simply is, and inevitability becomes less like a rule, more like a frame of perception. As the chrononaut sits with these ideas, they begin to feel a surprising comfort. The question, is anything still inevitable, transforms from something heavy into something peaceful. It becomes a reminder that the universe is more spacious, more forgiving, more generous than they first imagined. The traveller realises that inevitability does not have to be a chain. It can be a thread, one among many, forming a tapestry that holds both destiny and freedom. To make this gentler still, imagine a candle burning in a dim room. The flame flickers, casting shifting shadows on the wall. Some shapes return again and again, predictable in their movement, the fixed parts of the world. Others dance differently with every breath of air, the branching possibilities, and the candle itself, always there, holds both the flicker and the flame. The chrononaut begins to understand that time is like that candle. It holds both the steady and the shifting, both the known and the possible. This realization lightens something within them. They no longer feel trapped by the fear of making the wrong change or stepping into the wrong future. They begin to trust that time is not a fragile thread that can be easily broken, but a vast tapestry that can hold many patterns at once. Whether certain events are woven tightly or loosely, no longer feels like a burden. They are simply part of the story. By the end of their reflection, the chrononaut feels something they hadn't expected. Gratitude. Gratitude that some things endure. gratitude that some things change, gratitude that the world is both stable enough to feel familiar and open enough to allow new paths to bloom, and gratitude that they, as a traveller, can walk through these possibilities without needing to know which ones are meant to be. In this softened understanding, inevitability becomes less of a rule and more of a reassurance. Some outcomes will find their way no matter what. Others will blossom only when someone chooses them, and the chrononaut, instead of searching for a single truth, begins to rest in the quiet harmony of a world that holds both. There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from the body, nor even from the mind in any ordinary sense, but from the subtle tension of standing between too many possibilities at once. As the chrononaut continues drifting through time, sometimes stepping into rooms that have already unfolded, sometimes into branches that only exist because of their presence, something begins to settle softly inside them. It is not fear and not confusion, but a delicate weight. A feeling of being stretched, not across space, but across versions of reality that no longer fully align. This is the beginning of what one might call reality sickness, a gentle yet profound weariness that comes from living in more than one story at a time. It starts with moments that seem harmless, moments the traveller barely notices. A street corner feels familiar, but the building that once stood there in their memory is made of different stone. A melody played by a musician sounds almost right, but the ending falls a note short of what they remember. A friend they meet recognises them, but the warmth in their greeting holds a different history, shaped by events that did not unfold in the timeline the traveller once knew. These small misalignments gather quietly, not sharp enough to alarm, but enough to make the chrononaut feel a slight distance from the world, as if everything is a half step removed from where their memories place it. At first, the traveller tries to adjust. They tell themselves that these differences are small, that they can adapt to them as one adapts to a new city or a new routine. And for a time, this seems possible. But each step into a timeline shaped by a different past adds another layer to the dissonance. Their memories no longer match the world they walk through. Their emotions respond to things that never happened here. Conversations echo with meaning from branches no one else remembers. Imagine waking from a vivid dream, not frightening, just different, where people you know act slightly unlike themselves, speak thoughts they have never spoken, live out moments that never occurred. For a few breaths after waking, the dream world clings to you. You see the real world clearly, yet part of your mind continues reaching for the version of events your dream offered. Reality sickness feels a little like living in that moment, not for seconds, but for days, for weeks, for entire stretches of wandering through the corridors of time. The chrononaut begins to sense the gap widening. They try to reconcile the memories of one timeline with the events of another, but the fit is never perfect. Even familiar rooms seem to tilt in a way that doesn't match their recollection. A home they once returned to might contain photographs of moments that never occurred in their original life. A favourite food from childhood might taste slightly different, shaped by ingredients grown under unfamiliar conditions, influenced by small ripples they created long ago. Nothing is wrong, exactly, but nothing is entirely right. As this sensation deepens, the traveller begins to feel unmoored. The self they carry, the one shaped by a particular sequence of memories, can no longer find a perfect match anywhere in time. They are a visitor in every version of reality, moving through lives that almost fit but never fully embrace them. They feel like a story that has slipped loose from its original page. This unmooring affects the traveller emotionally before it affects anything else. Conversations with people they love feel tinted with mismatched history. The person standing before them is real, alive, warm, but the connection they share carries echoes of different timelines. The traveller remembers a conversation from years ago that never happened here, a shared moment that shaped their bond in one branch, but does not exist in another. They might mention a memory in passing, only to see confusion flicker across the listener's face. And in that brief flicker, the traveller feels the weight of a truth they can't explain. They're no longer rooted in a single history. To understand this more gently, picture a traveller holding two maps at once, each drawn with loving detail, each mapping similar but not identical worlds. As they try to navigate, they find themselves switching between the maps, looking for landmarks that match both versions. But some rivers flow differently in one map. Some roads curve where the other map shows a straight path. Eventually, their sense of direction blurs, and they realise they can no longer trust either map completely. They must rely not on memory, but on presence. For the chrononaut, the same shift occurs. They learn that they cannot anchor themselves in memory alone. Memory has become a mosaic built from pieces of many timelines, a patchwork that no single world fully reflects. And so, the traveller turns inward, grounding themselves not in what happened before, but in who they are now, in the awareness observing each moment, even when the moment feels unfamiliar. This inward turn brings clarity. The chrononaut realises that reality sickness is not a flaw, but a natural response to being stretched across many possibilities. It is the mind trying to reconcile worlds that no longer align. It is the heart trying to hold on to connections formed in rooms that the current timeline does not contain. It is the quiet ache that arises when the self moves faster than the reality it walks through. With time, this sensation evolves. Instead of feeling lost, the chrononaut begins to feel flexible. The dissonance softens. They start to see each misaligned memory not as a mistake, but as a reminder of the richness of existence, of all the lives they have touched, all the versions of the world they have walked through, all the futures that bloomed because of their gentle ripples. Reality sickness becomes less of a burden and more of a testament to everything they have witnessed. And eventually the traveller learns a new way of being. They become someone who does not cling to a single storyline, but who carries within them the quiet echoes of many. Someone who understands that identity does not require a perfect match between memory and world. Someone who can rest in the present moment even when the past behind them is woven from several threads. In this softened understanding, the chrononaut begins to heal. They realise that no timeline contains the whole of who they are, but every timeline contains a part. And together, those parts form a deeper self, one spacious enough to hold all the versions of reality they have walked through. There is a point in the chrononaut's wandering where the question of which future to choose begins to dissolve, not because the answer has become clear, but because the traveller starts to sense that the idea of a perfect timeline may be a mirage, a distant shimmer on the horizon that vanishes the moment one approaches it. After walking through loops that resist change, branches that blossom from the smallest gestures, and entire realities that unfold differently because of choices made in passing, the traveller begins to see something soft and profound. Every timeline carries its own quiet joys, its own hidden sorrows, its own balance of light and shadow. Perfection, if it exists at all, does not belong to worlds. It belongs to moments. This realization doesn't arrive all at once. It forms slowly, like morning light seeping into a dim room. The chrononaut may find themselves standing on a hill at sunset in a version of the world shaped by one of their earlier ripples. The sky's beautiful. The wind is gentle. People walk below with laughter and ordinary conversations. Everything looks peaceful. And yet the traveller knows that in another branch someone who exists here does not exist there. A kindness offered in the past created an opportunity in one world, but closed another door in a different one. A sorrow avoided on this hill may be a memory carried deeply in another version of the same moment. And so, even beauty begins to carry its own soft complexity. To make this clearer, imagine holding two pebbles, one smooth, one rough. You might pick the smooth one as the better of the two, but if you look closely, the rough pebble carries its own texture, its own history, its own meaning. Neither is perfect. Both contain something worth touching. Timelines are like this. The traveller learns that no version of reality is entirely free of difficulty. In one branch, a conflict is healed earlier. In another, a misunderstanding lingers longer but leads to a deeper connection later. In one reality, a person finds success early. In another, they grow more slowly but carry a richer resilience. Perfection becomes impossible to define, because every thread of time carries both the weight and the wonder of being alive. There is a moment when the chrononaut tries to imagine what a truly perfect timeline would look like. They try to picture a world with no suffering, no loss, no mistakes. But the longer they sit with the idea, the more the picture begins to blur. Without difficulty, how would people grow? Without mistakes, how would wisdom form? Without sadness, how would joy find its meaning? The chrononaut realizes that every version of the world they have touched carries its own rhythm, its own blend of softness and struggle, and that removing one element risks unravelling the meaning of the others. This realization deepens when the traveller encounters a person whose life they once changed without noticing. Perhaps it was a simple interaction, a small kindness that shifted someone's day just enough to change their future. In this branch, that person carries a quiet strength they might not have had otherwise. They smile a little more easily, they speak with a confidence that surprises the traveller, and yet in another timeline the chrononaut has glimpsed that same person grew a different kind of strength, born from challenges that were never softened by the traveller's presence. Their resilience was forged in difficulty rather than comfort. In that moment, the chrononaut understands something essential. Different does not mean better. Softer does not mean stronger. Harder does not mean worse. Each path creates a person who is real, whole, and shaped by the world around them. Perfection cannot be measured by ease or hardship. It can only be understood through the quiet authenticity of each life as it unfolds. Imagine a tapestry woven with threads of many colours. Some threads are deep and heavy, others light and shimmering. If you remove the darker threads to create a brighter picture, the tapestry loses its depth. If you remove the lighter threads to emphasize strength, the tapestry loses its warmth. It is the combination, the interplay of shadow and light, that creates the beauty. Timelines are woven in the same way. As the chrononaut continues walking through these many branches, they begin to soften their grip on the idea of a single, best reality. They understand that their longing for perfection was, in part, a longing for certainty, a desire to know they had chosen well, acted rightly, moved in harmony with some grand design. But the more they see, the more they realize that time itself does not ask for perfection. It asks for presence, and in presence, even imperfect moments become meaningful. There is a day when the traveller sits beside a river in a timeline that exists because of a choice they made long ago, a choice so small they barely remember it. The water flows quietly, carrying reflections of branches overhead. The scene is peaceful. But the chrononaut knows that somewhere, in another version of this place, the river's path is slightly different. Perhaps a stone they once disturbed changed the current's flow. Perhaps a conversation they altered prevented someone from planting a tree whose shade would have fallen here. Neither river is better. Both flow. Both carry the world forward. Slowly, the traveller begins to understand that perfection is not the absence of sorrow or difficulty. It is the ability to appreciate the world as it is, full of contrasts, full of possibilities, full of quiet harmonies formed from choices big and small. Each timeline carries its own form of completeness, and in this understanding a gentle peace settles over the traveller. They no longer feel the pressure to find or create a flawless version of reality. They begin to appreciate the small joys that bloom even in timelines marked by hardship. They begin to see beauty in imperfection, meaning in struggle, and value in every version of the world they encounter. The idea of a perfect timeline fades, replaced by something quieter and truer. The best timeline is not the one with the least pain, or the most joy, or the smoothest path. It is the one you are present in, fully, gently, and honestly. The chrononaut exhales, feeling this truth settle within them. They rise from the riverbank ready to continue their walk, not in search of perfection, but in gratitude for the endlessly varied, beautifully imperfect worlds time continues to offer. There is a kind of quiet burden that only appears after someone has seen too many versions of what life could be. It doesn't rise like a storm or fall like a sudden shadow. It settles slowly, like dust drifting through late afternoon light, almost invisible until the traveller pauses long enough to notice its presence. For the chrononaut, who has walked through loops that repeat themselves, branches that grow from the faintest gesture, an entire timeline shaped by choices that might never have mattered in another world, this burden becomes unavoidable. It is the weight of knowing the possibilities, the weight of imagining what might have been, the weight of carrying every what if, not as a question, but as a memory from a world they once touched. It often begins with the smallest thought. The chrononaut recalls a moment where they made a gentle choice, offering kindness, stepping aside, intervening softly. In the timeline before them, this choice led to a path of compassion or joy or growth. But somewhere else, in a branch they no longer walk, the absence of that choice led to a different unfolding. A person who healed sooner here took longer there. A conflict resolved in one reality deepened in another. A friendship flourished in one branch, but never bloomed in the next. The traveller carries the memory of both outcomes, even if only one world holds the version they now inhabit. This duality is not overwhelming at first. It arrives like a subtle echo, a gentle reminder that no act is simple. But as time passes and the chrononaut witnesses more paths diverge beneath their footsteps, the echoes accumulate. They begin to feel the invisible weight of futures denied and futures created, both held lightly in the space of their awareness. Imagine walking along a quiet road and reaching a fork. For most people, the choice is simple. Choose one path, wonder briefly about the other, and continue walking. But for the chrononaut, both paths remain alive. They have seen what lies down each one. One path might lead to a moment of laughter, the other to a moment of sorrow. One might lead to connection, the other to solitude. The traveller carries both endings, knowing that whichever world they select, a different world fades behind them, not erased, not destroyed, but unreachable. The knowledge has a softness to it, but also a gravity, as though each step forward pulls gently on the heart. This is where the weight of knowing becomes more complex. The chrononaut realizes that every choice they make, every whisper, every pause, every gesture, creates not only one reality but many. They stand at the threshold of infinite futures, aware that selecting one means releasing the rest. It is not the fear of choosing wrongly that troubles them, but the quiet ache of knowing that each choice blooms into a world they will never fully see. To understand this feeling, imagine holding a handful of seeds. Each seed carries a different flower, a different scent, a different possibility of colour. If you plant one, it grows into something beautiful, but the others remain unplanted, not wasted, but unrealised. The chrononaut does not mourn the lost flowers. They simply feel the gentle awareness that each one could have grown, had time unfolded differently. And this awareness becomes a companion in their journey. But the burden grows heavier when the traveller encounters moments of consequence, moments where their choice alters someone else's fate. Perhaps they offer comfort that changes a life. Perhaps they move a stone that shifts a path. Perhaps they interrupt an argument or encourage a fragile hope. In one timeline, their action brings healing. In another, the absence of that action would have taught a difficult but necessary lesson. The traveller carries both outcomes like two voices speaking softly in memory, neither wrong, neither entirely right. This is where humility enters. The chrononaut begins to understand that knowledge of many futures does not grant power. It grants responsibility, a responsibility softened by the realization that no future can be perfected, no timeline can be shaped without shadows, no choice can escape the ripples it creates. They learn that the universe is too intricate for any single person to steer, even one who walks through time. The traveller is not meant to sculpt outcomes, they are meant to inhabit them, and so the chrononaut begins to step more slowly through the world. They listen more carefully, they breathe more deliberately, they consider not only what they can change, but whether they should change it. They recognise that even benevolence can bend a timeline in ways they cannot predict. And in this awareness, they begin to act with a gentleness deeper than before, not out of fear of consequences, but out of respect for the delicate balance held within every moment. A memory returns to them, a version of the world where someone they cared for thrived because of a small intervention. And another version where that same person grew stronger because of a trial the traveller chose not to soften. The traveller realises that both outcomes have value, both carry meaning, both shape human hearts in ways that cannot be measured. The weight of knowing is not a burden of guilt. It is a reminder of how vast and intricate every life truly is. To bring this understanding closer, imagine a lantern carried through a dense forest at night. The lantern lights one path at a time, revealing roots and stones and small glimmers of dew. But just beyond the light, countless other paths remain hidden in darkness, not dangerous, simply unseen. The chrononaut learns that they can only walk the path illuminated before them. They cannot walk every path at once. The light they carry does not diminish the paths they do not choose. It simply guides them forward with care. In time, the weight of knowing becomes something gentler, not a burden, but a companion. A quiet reminder that life is always larger than the moment we stand in. A reminder that every choice, even the smallest, holds meaning, not because it leads to a perfect world, but because it reflects the heart of the one who chooses. And so the chrononaut continues their journey, no longer seeking to make the right choice or the best timeline, but simply to make choices with clarity, kindness, and presence. They accept that they cannot carry every possible future with them. They accept that some paths will remain unseen. They accept that knowing the what-ifs is not a weight to fear, but a quiet invitation to live gently within the world they inhabit. There comes a point in every long journey, not marked by a milestone or a sudden revelation, where the traveller realises they have begun to walk in a circle, slowly, softly, without even noticing. Not a closed loop in time, the kind that returns them to the same moment again, but a circle of understanding. After witnessing loops that refuse to break, branches that grew from single breaths, landscapes of time already woven, and the quiet weight of knowing too many futures, the chrononaut begins to sense a pull towards something deeply familiar. Not a past, not a place, but a feeling, a sense of home, not as a location but as a point of inner rest. It often begins with a small moment. The traveller steps into yet another version of reality, one shaped by choices they made long ago, and finds themselves standing in a kitchen that looks almost like the one they remember. The cups are arranged differently. The window frames a different tree. The air carries a faint scent that doesn't belong to their childhood, yet echoes it in a way that feels strangely comforting. And in that gentle familiarity, a thought arises. Every path I've walked, every version of reality I've touched, somehow carries a piece of me back toward myself. This realization grows slowly. The chrononaut begins noticing soft echoes across timelines, patterns of belonging that remain even when everything else shifts. They meet people who don't recognize them in one branch, but welcome them warmly in another. They find rivers that curve differently yet still carry the same quiet music. They encounter sorrow in one world and joy in another, but both emotions carry a truth they recognize in themselves. Through these countless ripples, the traveller begins to see that the world does not mirror them. It reflects the threads they carry inwardly. To understand this more deeply, imagine dropping a small pebble into a series of different ponds. Each pond ripples differently. One expands in wide circles, another breaks against reeds, another mixes with the motion of a light breeze. But in every pond, the ripple begins at the same point, the centre where the pebble meets the water. The chrononaut begins to realise that they are that centre. No matter how many ponds they step into, no matter how differently each world ripples outward, the origin of the ripple remains within them. This understanding leads them into a new kind of reflection. They think back on the countless versions of reality they've visited. Some were bright, some heavy, some strange, some heartbreakingly beautiful. In certain timelines, people they loved grew into different versions of themselves, softer in some worlds, fiercer in others, shaped by experiences the traveller could barely recognise. In a few branches, the chrononauts saw echoes of themselves, other versions formed by different histories, different losses, different joys. And yet, in all these reflections, they sensed something steady. An inner thread that remained unchanged regardless of what time did around it. That thread is the beginning of home. The traveller begins to notice that home is not tied to any single timeline. It is not a particular room or a familiar face or a set of memories arranged just the right way. Home is something quieter, woven from the constant presence of their own awareness, the way they carry themselves through each world, the tenderness they choose, the attention they give, the awe they feel when looking at a sunrise in yet another version of time. Home is not where they came from. It is who they are becoming as they move through possibilities. Imagine carrying a lantern in the dark. The lantern does not change the forest around you, nor does it erase the paths you did not take. It simply illuminates whatever lies before you, offering warmth in the middle of uncertainty. The chrononaut begins to see themselves as that lantern, a source of gentle light that remains constant even as the surroundings shift with every timeline. This shift in perspective changes how the traveller sees their journey. Instead of asking, which version of reality is the right one, they begin to ask, how can I meet each version with honesty and care? Instead of seeking the timeline that feels perfect, they begin to find beauty in the differences, wisdom in the contradictions, and meaning in the echoes that return them to themselves. They start to understand that the purpose of their journey was never to find the best possible world, but to find the self that walks through every possible world. The chrononaut begins to remember moments from different timelines, scenes that don't belong together yet coexist gently in their mind. A smile someone offered in one branch, a comforting hand held in another, a lesson learned through sorrow in one world and through joy in another. These memories no longer conflict. They become a chorus, each voice adding depth to the others. The traveller realises that home is a mosaic, made not from one timeline, but from all the timelines they have brushed against. This realisation brings a softness to the traveller's steps. They no longer feel torn between worlds. They no longer feel the ache of mismatched memories or the weight of choosing one future over another. Instead, they feel grounded, even in realities that feel strange or unfamiliar, because they carry their own centre with them. The ripple that once spread outward from their actions now feels like a ripple, returning inward, reminding them that every path eventually leads them back to a deeper sense of self. In this gentle understanding, the chrononaut discovers that time, for all its complexities, is not a maze to be solved, but a mirror. Every branch, every loop, every shift in reality reflects something back to them. Their resilience, their curiosity, their compassion, their longing to understand the world. The traveller sees that the meaning of their journey lies not in the destinations they reach, but in the quiet consistency of the heart they carry through each moment. And so, the ripple that once moved outward, changing worlds, shaping futures, bending possibilities, now guides the chrononaut inward, toward stillness, toward self-recognition, toward a sense of belonging that does not depend on any single timeline. They begin to feel, with a quiet certainty, that home is not something time can give or take. It is something time reveals. There comes a moment, sometimes after a long journey, and sometimes in the quiet pause between breaths, when the chrononaut finally understands what all the loops, branches, echoes, and shifting memories have been leading them toward. It is not a revelation delivered by the universe, nor a moment of cosmic instruction. It is something gentler, softer, a realization that settles the way dusk settles over a meadow, slowly and completely. The chrononaut has walked through worlds shaped by their smallest gestures. They have seen timelines where a single act of kindness bloomed into unexpected futures. They have stepped into branches where an unspoken word changed the shape of a life. They have drifted through versions of reality stitched from different sorrows, different joys, different choices, and they have carried the weight of those what-ifs like pebbles in a pocket, never heavy enough to break them, but always there, reminding them of how vast the landscape of possibility truly is. And yet, after all of this wandering, they begin to sense something profoundly simple. The most precious timeline is the one they are standing in right now. It does not declare itself as the finest or the brightest or the most harmonious. It simply offers itself as the present moment, imperfect, gently worn, full of threads that may not match neatly, but hold meaning nonetheless. The chrononaut realizes that no matter how many versions of the world they have visited, they can only live fully in one at a time, and because of that, this single moment, this breath, this place, this reality, becomes infinitely valuable. Imagine holding a small, ordinary stone. It might not be the smoothest stone you found, or the most colourful, or the most unique, but it is the one in your hand right now, warmed by your touch, shaped by your experience of it. The chrononaut begins to see each timeline in this way. Some are painful, some are joyful, some are complicated. But the timeline they inhabit at this very moment, even with its imperfections, is the only one where their presence can create meaning. They sit with this thought, letting it ripple through them like the soft glow of morning light. All the different versions of themselves, scattered across the branches of possibility, suddenly feel less like fragments and more like reflections. Each one represents a path that could have been, but none can replace the depth of the path they are walking now. The chrononaut looks around the world they inhabit, a room, a street, a landscape, and begins to sense the quiet beauty in its specific details. Perhaps in this timeline, a friendship exists that would not exist elsewhere. Perhaps a wound healed here more gently. Perhaps a chance encounter that never happened in another branch created a memory that shapes who they are today. The traveller begins to notice that every reality they walk through holds something that can only be found there. They start to realise that the imperfections of this timeline are not flaws, they are textures. They give shape to meaning, add depth to joy, and carve the spaces where growth can take root. A life without mistakes would be shallow. A world without difficulty would be colourless. And a timeline without unpredictability would lack the quiet wonder that arises from not knowing what comes next. This understanding brings the chrononaut a new sense of tenderness toward the present. They remember moments when they longed to change the past, to undo a sorrow, to soften a painful memory. But now, after seeing how different versions of the world unfold, they begin to appreciate how even their difficulties shaped them in ways that matter. A trial, once resented, may be the source of their strength. A loss once mourned may have opened a door to unexpected love. A choice once feared may have carved a path they would never trade for anything. To make this feeling more tangible, Imagine standing at the edge of a forest, looking at countless pathways winding through the trees. Each path leads somewhere, each holds its own beauty, but you can only walk one path at a time, and the path beneath your feet, the one you are touching, the one carrying your weight, is the path that becomes real. It is not perfect, it is simply yours. The chrononaut begins to understand that the true gift of time travel was never the ability to change the past or choose the future. It was the ability to see the preciousness of the present, to view it not as the default or the inevitable, but as one possibility among many, chosen not by fate but by presence. And because this moment could have been different, it becomes more meaningful, more sacred, more alive. They think about the people around them, how each person carries their own web of possibilities, choices made, choices avoided, dreams pursued, dreams abandoned. The chrononaut realizes that everyone, in their own way, is navigating a timeline shaped by countless unseen ripples. Every smile, every regret, every hope is part of a story that could have unfolded differently in another branch, but unfolds here with its own quiet grace. And perhaps this is what softens the chrononaut most of all. The recognition that everyone they meet is, in a sense, a traveller too. Not through time, but through life. Everyone walks a single path through a landscape of infinite possibility. Everyone carries what-ifs tucked into their memories. Everyone wonders about the versions of themselves they might have been. The chrononaut begins to feel that they no longer need to chase the perfect timeline or fear the imperfect one. Instead, they can settle into the one they inhabit, knowing that it is enough, not perfect, not predetermined, just enough. Enough to feel, enough to grow, enough to love, enough to live. Imagine the traveller sitting at last in a quiet room, the lantern of their awareness glowing softly beside them. All the timelines they visited, all the branches they glimpsed, all the versions of themselves they met, each becomes a gentle echo, fading into the background like distant waves. What remains is the stillness of now, the warmth of breath, the simple truth that they are here. And in that stillness, the chrononaut understands the final tender lesson of their journey. The timeline you're in, this one, is not perfect because it avoids pain. It is precious because you are living it.